What was in the sand?
Nothing. I've just made like a nice
You literally said you had an arse divot in the sand.
Yeah, well, I just, get comfortable
in that. Okay.
Exactly.
So I'm leaving this bit in too.
Oh,
like I left the start of the other bit in because it's just more fun. All right, we're at a beach. We didn't jet ski. We boated to the beach.
There's the boat.
There.
There's the boat.
Boat's still there. We're sitting next to the boat because last time I brought a security person out on the boat, the boat went up the beach.
The boat went up the beach like the boat is autonomous.
Somehow of its own accord. I'm not entirely sure how. So, okay, so we're here straight off the back of NDC in the Gold Coast. And I'm kind of just in a really bright light here. So I'm going to lock this sucker in because otherwise something's going to get funny later on. All right, so we came off the back of NDC Gold Coast. How do you find it? Because this is like your sort of third NDC in a way?
Third, yeah, I think. I've been doing a few now. It's really good. It was a good audience. I think I actually said after like the first day of the workshop, there's kind of like social and kind of cultural differences all around the world. Some audiences are like very quiet and just sit there and listen. Everybody here seemed kind of really fun and interactive. Asking questions, you could like feel the engagement. It was really good. Yeah. I enjoyed it.
So I reckon, in all honesty, and I've done this workshop maybe 50 times, I think it was sort of the most it was the most fun insofar as it was not just like engaging people, but like everyone was really focused, everyone was really interested in what was going on. I think everything from sort of the room to the fact that it is on we weren't on a desert island like this, but it was on a, in a nice sort of environment. Everyone's kind of chilled out too, weren't they?
Yeah, it was very relaxed.
It had a different vibe to it. So that was super successful. The organisers were really happy. So this is definitely going to be a 2018 thing, a 2019 thing. What's a 2018 thing?
That's now.
We also drank a lot of beer during the week, but anyway. So that'll be a 2019 thing, which would be really awesome. And of course we have NDC in Oslo, which you and I will be back at, in about 3 weeks, something like that?
Gosh, yeah, it's literally...
Weeks?
Yeah, it is.
Must be like 3.5 weeks. Oh man, we've got to go back to the cold again, the European summer. Ugh. Anyway.
4 aeroplanes.
And also in the background here, you're going to have seaplanes, and there's about 4 jet skis about to fire up over there as well. So we might have to wing our way through that. So at NDC yesterday, we spoke about a bunch of stuff. What I want to do actually is maybe go back and answer someone's question, because when we did the thing on the back of the boat last week, someone had a question, which I thought was actually a very good question. I'd like you to answer that, and I'm going to hit you with it as he expressed it in a moment. It's not a controversial one.
Okay.
But after that, we'll do the controversial one, which is certificates and things. So Andrew Burns said, I keep reading about how certificate revocation is broken, and reading about it, it seems to be, but then you've just discussed three certs being revoked, so how broken is it then? Good question.
Okay, so yeah, we have been talking about EV certificates being revoked right now as opposed to DV certificates. So pretty much, Chrome and Firefox have basically abandoned revocation checking for DV certs, and all of the other browsers that I'm aware of do a soft fail check where it's like, we'll try, and if it doesn't work, we'll just accept it anyway. They actually have to do that check for EV, so they're not allowed to skip it, they're not allowed to...
And hard fail. So if they can't do the check,
as well,
connection goes.
So yeah, they will have to sit there, send the request. If it goes slow, they wait. If it fails, then the browser will just outright refuse to accept the cert. So yeah, that's the only real difference, is that on EV certificates, the browsers all have to do this. For DV, they pretty much don't bother. And when they do bother, they kind of only half-arse do it anyway.
Okay, so, and actually, I think you've written a blog post about certificate revocations broken, haven't you?
Yeah.
So why don't I put that in the notes? And also for Andrew, you've also done a talk on certificate revocation. Is that recorded somewhere?
Yeah, it should be actually, I think.
All right, if you can find that, I'll put that in the notes as well. Now, of course, as part of that discussion, we were talking about revocation, etc. You just reminded me, one of the things that we did yesterday is we did a brand new talk, which you only found out you were doing the day before.
I submitted one talk, I got one talk accepted, and then my name was on the agenda twice.
Well, I submitted one talk for me and one talk for both of us, and I did tell you about it in advance.
18 hours, not advance.
Semantics, don't worry. So, but we did this talk, and this talk went exceptionally well, and I called it Everything is Cyber Broken. And the premise of it was things like Andrew's question just here. We keep using these technologies which in one way or another are flawed or broken. And I want to talk about the EV thing in a moment, but one of the things that was really great about this talk, and I got much pleasure out of watching you squirm as we did it, was we spoke about HTTPS being broken, and the premise was there, and I'm not even going to name them because we did this whole thing off the record, but there are a number of people who are quite prominent that have, and when I say prominent, they have large followings, tens, hundreds of thousands, in one case even almost 1 million followers, effectively coming up with stuff like everything from it's expensive to get a certificate through to devices won't support them, through to the NSA is using it to backdoor your things because NSA invented SHA-1 and SHA-2.
Yep. I mean, none of my answers have changed from yesterday.
This is why I had fun, because what I was doing is I was showing the quotes on the screen, or in the case of one of them, it was a YouTube video, just showing the YouTube clips. And he's sitting here just going, like, what do I say? What do I do?
I mean, you can't argue with crazy, dude.
I think we should do that talk again in Oslo, if we can. And I think we should also say it's not going to be recorded, because we did unload a little bit.
A bit of cyber venting.
There was a bit of cyber venting to be done. But you know, that was really interesting, and I mean, there was just no valid reason whatsoever why HTTPS shouldn't be used. I think the closest valid reason was things like that there is some effort involved in setting it up, and I grant people that the legacy effort. I don't grant them that on the new stuff. I think if you're doing something new, for the most part, it's usually very, very simple. The legacy stuff, okay, I understand if Joe and Jane running the coffee shop have got to go back to the web developer and go, hey mate, you know, we need you to put a padlock on our browser, sort of thing. There's some effort there. I get that.
Yeah.
But if they don't do it, site doesn't start working. And then this was one of the really weird sort of things from one of the naysayers. I've heard them referred to as HTTPS anti-vaxxers. So one of them sort of said, look, it's going to kill the web. It's a book burning exercise. Well, no, it's not.
Delete the history.
It's just that when you go to the site and the connection is not secure, the browser is going to say the connection is not secure. And Chrome, of course, will start doing that in July.
Yeah, for all sites, yeah.
Now, this is clearly Google trying to take over the web, right?
Yep, popular opinion number 2.
So, and this is leading us to the discussion that leads into the EV discussion that's been a bit heated today as well, where there seems to be a really, I don't know if like strong opposition is the right word, but there is a theme amongst people who believe that Google is trying to control the web by, I guess, we can't even say mandating HTTPS, but pushing people towards HTTPS. What say you to that?
Well, you know, I mean, for starters, it's not just Google, is it? I mean, look at how many other organizations there are. Let's Encrypt is probably the single largest organization responsible for the current drive that we're seeing, because organizations like GitHub are now using Let's Encrypt to encrypt all GitHub Pages websites that have custom domains. And of course, if you're on the GitHub one, you have HTTPS anyway. WordPress, Heroku, all of the hosted app platforms, none of them have anything to do with Google. You know, Mozilla is a completely open foundation, and they
not for profit.
They're completely on board with the whole, we need to move the web to HTTPS.
Right, and they're doing the visual indicators and things in Firefox as well. Look, I mean, I guess Chrome is the most dominant browser.
And Safari, which we found out like just the other day.
Oh yes, so then you make a good point there. So Safari, I just learned that Safari on iOS, if you go to an HTTP page with a login form, as soon as you click on the login form up the top, it sort of goes a little bit red and says not secure or something to that effect. But everyone already agreed.
Damn Google.
Well, everyone knows Apple is evil, so that's no news. But this was a very odd argument. Now, fast forwarding to today, there's been more discussion along these lines, which frankly just echoes things we've been discussing the last few days. However, the first thing we did today is went and took a photo of you in front of Trustico. Do you want to? How were you not blocked from doing that?
So Trustico, for background, is the CA that emailed 24,000 private keys, I think it was, to DigiCert to try and have them revoked because they wanted them to reissue them from Komodo. There's some backstory there, but basically I was kind of, you know, fairly critical of their actions on the Twitters, and that resulted in them blocking me. And we found out just a day or two ago, coincidentally, they happened to be several stone throws in that direction. Sorry, that direction.
That direction.
And I went and stood outside their offices this morning and took a photo. And there's also like a couple of follow-on tweets where I was just having some friendly banter.
Friendly banter, not real.
Weirdly, look at the tweets and you'll understand what I mean, but I staged a couple of events and took some funny photos and posted them on Twitter. And I've had a few people tweet me and someone DM me like, "Oh my God, did this happen?" And it's like, that's a stunning indictment of how low people's faiths in CAs are. That people thought that could be real, and it was quite clearly staged.
That's what I was about to say. It's like, this is so obviously fake, but the fact that it is conceivable
this could have happened
is not a good indictment. Now, part of what we were speaking about yesterday in our Everything Cyber Broken was the incidence of EV certs being revoked. So we had Ian Carroll got his Komodo certificate revoked, got his DigiCert certificate revoked. Literally the reason was because reasons. Komodo later apologised for that. We had James Burton, who had a legal registered entity called Identity Verified. He got Identity Verified revoked. I think was the reason for that other? No, that was someone else. We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
They said it could be confusing for users. Now that kind of struck me as odd because he has a legal registered entity called Identity Verified.
It's the name of the company.
He got a certificate for Identity Verified, and then EV did what it's meant to do, and it says Identity Verified, which is a confusing bit. You know, like,
EV doing what EV does.
Evidently, I think the confusing bit was that they're saying somehow this verifies that the identity, or indicates that the identity has been verified, which ironically is what EV is meant to do, right?
Yeah, but everybody knows that that's the name of the company, so where was the confusion?
I think, as one person sort of said in one of the tweets I had there, that basically the thing that the commercial CAs seem to be unhappy about here is effectively, it says what it say here, it's a bit of a piss take about the effectiveness of EV, because it is possible to go and register something which is extremely misleading. Now, speaking of,
but should an example of how something doesn't quite work be sufficient grounds to revoke it, to undo it? You know, it kind of feels like, oh, someone's criticised our system and we're going to penalise you for that. I'm not really sure I agree with that.
You know, one of the interesting bits of the discussion there was we sort of said, look, these certificates got revoked later on, and you sort of made the point that if they had have, and I forget the exact nomenclature you used, but if they had have issued it without having done the proper checks and it being like, that's actually a much bigger problem, right?
Yeah. So, and this is the point, right? There's not been any penalties against the CAs because they have been issued correctly according to the guidelines with all the requirements having been met. So it's not because they were improperly issued that they were revoked, it's just because the CA didn't like something about what had happened.
And if they had been improperly issued, then they'd have a bigger problem because the CA is now improperly issuing certs, and there's actually serious retribution as a result of that. Okay, so moving on, one of the things that happened yesterday during the day before we did our talk in the afternoon was we saw a tweet from someone at a conference where the Entrust CEO had shared a slide. I'll link into this one as well. You've got to remember all the things we're linked to.
Yeah.
And what this tweet showed was a chart of the trustworthiness of different certificates and their propensity to phishing. And it basically said, look, we did a study. No EV certificates were used for phishing. A small number of OV were, and we barely even talk about OV these days for various reasons. And then a heap of DV were, you should use EV. What say you?
I have a shark repelling leaf.
But I don't see any sharks.
It's a shark repelling leaf.
I want to buy your leaf.
I think that sums up my thoughts on that.
Okay, so let's be a little bit more technical about it. So the thing that I found very odd about this is who the message is being sent to, because what they're saying to someone is, or what they're really saying is, we didn't find phishing sites on EV certificates. But it's almost like, so what? If you go and get an EV certificate for your company, that doesn't stop someone going and getting a DV certificate for the site, which is meant to phish people and impersonate your site.
So like I could get a DV cert for haveonebeenpwned.com and try and phish have I been pwned with a DV cert.
But I've got EV, so how does that happen?
In that case, I'm not allowed to do that.
But this is the thing, that just doesn't reconcile. And we saw a I'm not sure what the right word for it is, but like a very public smackdown in a series of tweets from Ryan Sleevey from Google, who just absolutely ripped it to shreds, pointing back to the original research that was done and just saying, look, this is just nonsensical. Part of the problem as well is that, I think we're coming to expect in the industry that claims should be validated and substantiated, and they should be evidence-based. And I noticed that the very first bullet point on that Entrust slide was, it is known that EV and OV are less or more resilient against phishing. And we're like,
and this is kind of the thing.
No, it's not. What's your source?
You know, my blogs and stuff keep coming back to it. One of my original points in my kind of EV articles is we expect people in the security industry to prove with evidence and research their claims. You know, it's like, oh, a product does this, like here's a demo, here's some research. You know, Chrome's looking at removing the EV UI, and they're currently doing like user groups and case studies and experiments and measuring metrics. They want hard data to back any decision that they do make. And I keep challenging CAs on this, and I think it's fair to be like, okay, you make this claim that EV is better, please provide me the research, white papers, user groups, case studies, and you know, I haven't seen any yet.
Now, this was actually interesting. Let's drill into that a bit. So you said, you know, Chrome's doing studies to see the effectiveness of the indicators, and we knew already that one of the things Chrome was doing was effectively like some A/B testing with playing around with, what do they call it? The chip, isn't it?
Yeah, the secure chip.
So if you look at the top left-hand corner of your browser, just next to the address bar, the secure chip, where it says secure and it's got the padlock and all these sorts of things. So they're playing around with what that looks like and using people like you guys as guinea pigs. Now, part of what they're playing around with at the moment is removing the visual indicator for EV certificates. And incidentally, if you're on an iPhone like this one and you're using Chrome, you don't see it anyway. It's not there. So let's not forget that all of this is a visual indicator. It's not there a lot of the time. Right. It's always up to the client. By pure coincidence, 2 different people in my workshop earlier this week, with a total of 3 different machines between them, all Macs was the only sort of common thread. Yeah. Weren't showing the EV chip. None of them had changed any defaults. None of them were on Canary builds. They all had mainstream Chrome builds. And the only conclusion we could come up with, and I think we've sort of verified this independently as well, is that these people were part of the focus group of what happens when you remove EV. Yep. Now, I think the first thing on this, to go back to your point, is that Chrome researches this extensively. They have a massive install base, and even if they only take a very, very small slice of that and test this, they're going to have very, very large numbers on which to base their decisions. We have both been involved in some threads just this morning, and incidentally, this is Thursday. We're recording this today earlier, so Thursday morning, Gold Coast time, where people were very vehemently defending EV because it feels right to them. Yeah, and we're sort of saying, okay, maybe you do always look at the chip. Maybe you do always inspect the. I don't know. Maybe you write down the serial number of the bloody certificate for all I know, and then you manually check it every time you go back to the site. Maybe you do that, but that's you. And this is installed to like this massive group of hundreds of millions of people, billions of people, maybe. Certainly hundreds of millions around the world.
Probably close with mobile.
Yeah, add mobile. You must be close to what's that? 9 figures. So this is all very, very evidence-based. But the other thing I thought was funny, and you had a look at both the machines in my workshop too, is that when we're talking to the people there, first of all, the only reason they noticed it was gone was because when I did the module on certificates and I was talking about EV and I was showing how have I been pwned has it, one of the girls was looking a bit confused. She's going, I don't see it.
This one does not look like the other.
Yeah, exactly. and I, that's when we went and looked at it and we saw that she hadn't turned it off or used any of the flags. And I said to her, when did you see EV begin to disappear? And she's like, I don't know, I actually never noticed it before. And these are technical people building systems. Yep. Maybe not dedicated security pros, but technical people building systems. And they're this tiny, tiny, tiny slice of this much, much, much bigger audience of people who will never look for this stuff. So for everyone sort of defending it, you've really got to kind of take a step back and look at the masses, right? So look at how is this used by the target demographic of the browser, which is your everyday people. And Chrome inevitably at some point, I suspect, will make the decision to remove the EV indicator. Someone today even said, I will stop using Chrome if they do that.
Okay.
First of all, okay. It's like,
there's really no argument to that, is there?
Well, I sort of said to him, okay, well, what happens when, let's say you go to Firefox? What happens when Firefox removes it? You know, because what will happen is over time, the usefulness of this will go down to just about nothing anyway. Because if the world's most dominant browser uses it, a lot of what organizations think is the value proposition disappears, right?
Yeah, and the kind of, depending on how you look at the numbers, the usefulness, the actual usage of EV is also declining, because we're currently seeing this huge explosion in encrypting the web. So we're having like more and more sites on HTTPS, but the staggering vast majority of those are going DV. So we're seeing like DV accelerate away from EV in the growth as well. So you know, EV isn't maintaining its market share right now either.
I can't remember the exact figure, and we've got just about no Wi-Fi here, or 4G, so it's a bit hard to figure it out. But from memory, that Entrust slide yesterday said something like 0.7% of sites within the sample set, which I think might have been a bit of a biased sample set as well, had EV. So it was only like a tiny slice anyway. And
that slice is, so like absolute numbers, EV is growing, but market share wise it's declining as well, so who knows what that will do.
We kind of touched on OV before, but just for curiosity, what's the value proposition of OV? Because OV still requires you to invest effort to prove identity, but then you don't get any visual indicator of it.
I don't know. I mean, I think that's probably why OV's market share is the tiniest of them all, because...
But I think OV had... I'm going to try and get up now. I think OV had a bigger market share than EV.
Oh, okay. So in terms of the number of sites running the search, sorry. I phrased that wrong. So, but I don't know. Like it's like go through most of the hardship of EV and then don't get the pretty green thing in the browser.
So here it is. I've got the stats now. So this was EV 0.7% of the total population of certificates. OV was 5%. So that's somewhere crazy. Here we're doing 7 times plus more OV than EV.
And it looks exactly the same as DV in the browser. There's literally, visually, without going into the set and inspecting it, there's no way to know.
If anyone knows,
why, I can think of a reason.
Maybe get a bigger warranty.
This is what it will be. We've got more. Go to a CA website and look at the marketing sheet and see.
Yeah, no, there must be a marketing sheet. So Scott's already done the smackdown on warranty. Now, I'm sure I've spoken about it here on this update as well, but we have never ever been able to find any evidence of anyone claiming a warranty, and no CA has ever actually been able to tell us, even though they've been asked for it.
They still haven't, still to this day. This is the thing, right? We ask questions for... I don't want to make these assertions without evidence, and I want to make sure that I'm correct in what I'm saying. So it's like, okay, provide me with the information.
So just to wrap up on this, and I'm conscious that there are people that work for CAs and resellers, etc., who watch this, or certainly who engage with this online as well. This is not sort of a crusade against commercial CAs, and it's not necessarily even a crusade against EV. I think that the thing that is irking both you and I and others like us in the InfoSec community is the misrepresentation. It's when someone pops up and says, look, we have this thing, you should pay us money for it. It does something that it doesn't actually do. That's the thing that really riles us up, right?
And that's why I guess I've invested the time into doing these things, is I don't feel that that's right. If you make a claim, substantiate it and I'll leave you alone. But if you just keep making claims without backing them up, I just don't think it looks good. I don't think it's good for the wider ecosystem. There's a lot of misinformation, misunderstanding out there. We need to tidy it up.
Moving on, 2 new blog posts from this week. So I wrote about, in fact, both about new Pluralsight courses. So I wrote about OWASP Top 10, so you're very familiar with the OWASP Top 10. There is a new Top 10. There is a 2017 edition of the Top 10 that popped out, funnily enough, in 2017, late 2017. I was in San Fran a couple of months ago and I recorded a Pluralsight play-by-play course with Andrew Vanderstock, who is on the OWASP board and was influential. Whoa!
Oh no!
No!
Disaster!
We lost it. It all fell apart. That wasn't like some crazy Australian animal that just jumped on it either. Let's just be clear about that.
The shark came out of the water for us.
We've actually been trying to find a kangaroo for Scott, because Scott hasn't seen a kangaroo in the wild yet. And there's normally kangaroos on the beach here, but as soon as you come here, no kangaroos. Maybe they're
scared of the English.
Bright light reflecting off your legs has scared them away. Could be that. Could be that. So, OWASP Top 10. So, the OWASP Top 10 has been something that I've been involved in a lot in terms of trying to pitch material at developers, security material, because the OWASP Top 10, and this is the Top 10 Web Application Security Risks, of course, is just a really awesome resource for explaining things in developer-centric terms. And what I wanted to do with Andrew was to do this 2017 edition where we kind of said, okay, look, we're not going to drill into the detail because frankly 70+% of it is stuff that we've seen before anyway, but what's changing? And there are a few things that shuffled. So cross-site scripting went from, I think, the number 3 WISP to the number 7. Cross-site request forgery actually dropped off. And we might sort of say, oh, this is good, we're getting better at doing these things, but I feel...
Is it just that we added more worse stuff?
Well, did we just do other stuff worse and that got more prominence? So according to Andrew, what's actually happened is the frameworks are getting better. So frameworks are getting better at outputting coding, frameworks are getting better at building anti-forgery tokens into things, and that's improved it. But I mean, how do you feel about that? We haven't actually discussed this. This is a very candid discussion.
Oh, it's kind of like a double-edged sword, right? So if it's the frameworks that are getting better, it's not us.
Exactly, and that's the bit that I lament, where it's like, okay, on the whole, if we're improving the risks of these particular classes, XSS and CSRF, then that is good, but we're not actually getting any smarter. Well, maybe the people building the frameworks are getting smarter, but the rest of us actually using it are just...
And I guess it's a good way to tackle the problem, right? Because we're probably not going to ever fully educate everybody in the world. So, you know, it's like cars. We never made everybody a great driver, so we just added more safety systems. Maybe that was the same approach with frameworks.
You know, I think that's part of it. I still really would like people to understand the way the frameworks work. And that's certainly in the Hack Yourself First course, which we're both doing now as well. You know, I mean, we take XSS and we talk about how outputting coding works and why it's important in context. Take CSRF and pull apart the way anti-forgery tokens work. Because I see so many people who say, we mitigate the risk of CSRF, we have anti-forgery tokens. And I go, okay, cool, how do they work? And they go, oh, there's a form? Okay, what else? Like, what does it actually do? So those two have dropped down a little bit. We've had unvalidated redirects and forwards has disappeared already, or I'm trying to remember, did that disappear out of 2013? Anyway, that's gone. That was always very, very low down on the list, and it was kind of like, well, you can pass a URL to one URL and it does exactly what it's meant to do, which is sends you off to go elsewhere. The new ones are XSE is in there, XML external entities has popped in there, as well as insecure deserialization. So apparently we are seeing more risks in those areas than what we were with things like CSRF, which is now dropped off. Okay. So that play-by-play course is out. Oh, the other thing that Andrew said, and seriously, even if, like, just listen to Andrew, because you kind of don't have a choice, we're both in there. But he just has a lot of really interesting insight around the lines of things like, look, the threat landscape actually changed a lot in 4 years because of the prevalence of things like microservices now, which are exposing traditional systems behind behind firewalls and other places which just simply didn't have exposure before. So I thought that was really interesting too, and that is what justifies a new version of the top 10. It's like stuff's changed enough.
The landscape changes so dramatically, you know. I think it's right that we do need to keep on top of these things and keep abreast of the latest problems.
So that's evolving. I guess we'll see another top 10 in 2020 or 2021 or something. We know stuff's going to keep changing. So that was blog post number 1. Blog post number 2, which I'll actually pump out tonight, I've already written, is for another Pluralsight course, which is about shadow IT. So I started doing this quarterly series. We pumped out the first one in January about creating a security-centric culture. And this was in response to organisations doing what I think is almost going through a bit of a maturity process, where they're saying the hard skills are good, but how do we actually bake this into the culture? You know what I mean? So how do we go beyond just saying to people, parameterize your queries, and it's all like, how do we make people genuinely invested in doing this? And they almost do it with like this unconscious competence sort of thing.
Yeah.
So we did the first one in January. It is camera looking at me and screencast in my office, using the same sort of setup I use here, less bright. And we put it out there in front of the firewall too, so it's free. So the January one was all around culture. The one which is, I guess, Q2, albeit coming out in May, is also free. That's in front of the firewall, and it's on shadow IT. Again, we didn't prep this, but have you seen shadow IT in the places you've worked before? Do you want to define it and then give an example?
Oh,
think fast, Scott.
I know, right? Stop throwing these at me. So, I mean, like, the first thing that pops to mind is just stuff that you don't know about, that you have. Like some system, some box in a cupboard, a server, a service. It's the kind of stuff you find in Showdown. Is probably my best explanation.
So someone has stood it up like outside formal channels.
Yeah. So it's not properly documented or known about, or like in asset management. What's the term? Like inventoried. Yeah, right.
Okay, so it hasn't gone through sort of formal IT channels. It's been someone in the marketing department who's just decided we need a thing, and they've gone out and done it.
Airplane.
Seaplane. We shut the seaplane. There we go.
Oh, it's pretty noisy, that thing.
So he often pulls up on the beach just up here, and I'll come here on the jet ski and work for a little bit, and he just kind of wanders around. He's like, "You want to go for a seaplane ride?" You know, it's like $100 or something like
Nice.
that. You jump on the seaplane, you go for a ride, which is a pretty sweet idea actually. Okay, so it's sort of outside of mainstream channels, IT.
Yeah.
Have you seen any good examples there? Like you don't have to name and shame, but what would be a good example?
In the finance industry, I did a couple of years contracting there. We came across all kinds of things when we were running scan and test tools internally. Of like, oh hey, we found this system that's like super out of date, and then no one owns it. You know, it's like, oh, it must belong to this team, and they're like, oh no, sorry, that's not ours. And you go to a different team, and all the time.
Almost sort of orphaned in that case.
Yeah.
So I would certainly see, in the blog post I gave an example, seeing things like access databases. You know, it's like someone has solved their problem with access. And fortunately, their mate's best friend's neighbour's dog does a bit of access, and they have created the access database, and it now runs the accounting department. And then someone comes along and says, "Oh, can you please, help us support this thing? Because funny thing, we put it on a network share, and 20 people are using it, and it's going a little bit slow." So that's the sort of canonical shadow IT in my mind. Certainly, that is precisely the scenario I always used to have to deal with in the enterprise. Fast forward today though, and I mean you mentioned Shodan, which is obviously crawling the web looking for everything exposed. Shadow IT today is much more, isn't it cool? We can just stand stuff up in Amazon really easily.
Well, this is the thing, it's a lot easier to create, right? Like you can just press buttons in a UI and boom, Shadow IT.
Well, I mean, let's be fair, an access database is very easy to create, but at least it's sitting behind the firewall on Bob's PC.
Yeah.
And then Bob goes online and he's like, yeah, I'll have some S3 storage. Doesn't really understand about passwords. Clickety click. Here we go, and suddenly you're in the news with Chris Rickery. So it doesn't work out real well. So it's interesting how the way Shadow IT has evolved over time, and it's not just sort of storage level stuff either. Think about all the the Trellos of the world, or someone will go around and say, hey, we're just going to make a Slack channel publicly facing. Nothing wrong with Slack, but you probably don't want to let your organisation sign up there with the same crappy passwords as they'll use everywhere else, and no 2FA, and then talk about the company secrets. Perfect example of Shadow IT. So the course talks a lot about that. Talks about the problem, talks about, remember when Britain did something really silly with security?
Oh, which day last week?
Remember your politicians in December?
Amber Rudd?
No, she did something else silly. That was different.
There's too many
The password
things.
sharing.
Oh, the MP who has to come in the office and ask her staffers what her password is that day.
So this stemmed from Nadine, I think it was Nadine Dorries, and this was after Damien Green. So that the chronology of this was Damien Green was an MP. They found some nudie pics on his PC. He was in rather a lot of trouble for that. Well, this is where it goes, right? Because he was sort of saying, are they in the same political party, Damien Green and Nadine Dorries?
I couldn't tell you.
Dude, it's your politics.
They're all the same.
Anyway, so obviously he had some porn on his machine. He was under the microscope. Is that just a funny thing over there?
Oh, I know it's the story. It was like the whole. Somebody else did it. It's like 6-year-old kids.
So this is the thing that Nadine, I believe the context was she was coming to his defense by saying someone else could have used his computer, and people like you and I would go, well, how did they get his credentials? Well, he gives them to other people. And then it sort of unfolded in a series of tweets with a whole bunch of MPs being defensive of the proposition of giving their password to their staffers. And what it boiled down to is that a lot of the reason for this was because they get too many emails. And their rationale, and like, let's be respectful to the fact that they were actually trying to solve a problem. I think we've got to recognise that. So their rationale of how they're going to solve the problem was they would give the password to the staffers would log onto their computer, process their emails, job done. Mm-hmm. And of course the gap here is that we have delegated access rights and things like this, where in an environment like Office 365, which is what they're all running in British Parliament, you can do this. You literally go into Outlook and say, look, I would like to give my staffers access, and then they can access things under their own credentials but on your behalf.
And then it can be audited properly.
Then it can be audited, then you can't blame them for putting the nudie pics on your PC as well. Now, I think the important thing here is again, they had a need, and it was a valid need. And I think Nadine said she gets 300 emails a day or something, which would be an absolute nightmare. So there was a need, and evidently somewhere, that like the gap between what they needed and what was available just wasn't closed. And to me, a lot of the shadow IT is trying to see where it happens and not just say, no, don't do it, because I'd see this happen before, and it just disenfranchises people and doesn't help them actually achieve their objectives. I'd much rather see people say, hey, let me understand what you're trying to do, and now let's give you the technology to make that possible.
And that's kind of the point, right? Security. As soon as security gets in the way of doing something, it'll be done without security.
Yeah, and that's
we're being real about that.
That's a perfectly valid point. I think ultimately this course will hopefully get people thinking a little bit more about that, trying to. I hope it not just reduces shadow IT, and to be fair as well, there are times where the buck has got to stop somewhere. It's like, no, we just simply can't do that with the customer data, whether it be legally or by any sort of rational, sensible measure. So it's going to happen somewhere, but I just hope that this gets people thinking a little bit more about how do we give people the tools they need rather than just beat them with the stick and say you can't do this. If you give them the tools and they still do it anyway, then beat them with the stick. That's different. Last thing I've got, NetSparker sponsoring me this week. You know NetSparker. You've spoken to the guys there. I noticed that they just had a major upgrade as well. So last week I went and grabbed NetSparker. I can't remember seeing an upgrade this significant. Like the entire UI and everything was different. And I've been using it for I think about 7 years or something. So I'm sure they've had lots of upgrades in that time, but this was obviously a really significant piece of work. Did you know they recently got $40 million in funding?
Wow.
Yeah.
Imagine what I could do with that.
$40 million. You could buy a lot of EV certs with $40 million. Anyway.
Yeah, a lot of Let's Encrypt certs with that as well.
Let's not go there. So yeah, go and check out NetSparker. I'll link through to them again. And look, those guys have been awesome. This is one of these companies where I've met folks there in person before and had beer. In fact, I think I had haggis with one of the guys there in Scotland.
That's brave.
Apparently, they're very hard to catch, the haggis. This is what I was told.
I'm really glad they didn't tell you what was in it.
Speaking of which, we should actually go and try and catch a kangaroo because you got to go home tomorrow.
Yeah, sadly.
So you'll be back in England then. But we will both be catching up in London the week before NDC because we've got InfoSec EU. We're going to the SC Awards night as well. Quickly say what that is before we close out.
Oh, so the SC Awards 2018, they've got loads of different categories, best new security company, best culture, best etc. We have been nominated with Report URI, so we get to tuxedo up and go to a fancy awards dinner and hopefully, looking at the competition we're up against, actually, there's some really big companies there.
Hang on, I've got to get dressed up.
Oh yeah, this is a tuxedo job, by the way, sorry. Oh, did someone invite you to something and not tell you? Isn't that a shame?
Okay.
Yeah, it's a black tie event, so...
Yeah, I don't know, I'll be tuxedo, a black t-shirt event, you said. Anyway, thanks very much for watching this. This will be the last one with Scott, but maybe we'll do one in London, and then we'll be in Oslo the next week for NDC as well, so we'll do a few more. Thanks for watching this, guys. I hope that's been useful. Any questions, put them in the questions, discuss comments thing, and I'll get Scott to answer it if it's to do with like EV or certs or black ties as well. Thanks, guys.
See ya.